So with that being said, I'm going to introduce our Executive Director of the New York City Bar Association, Brett Parker.
Thanks, Angie. Thanks everyone for being here. It's really great to see people. This is a very important topic, and you know, unfortunately, I have to say that we've had similar programs like this over the recent years. It was just a year ago, next week, that we had a program on anti-Asian bias that we partnered with our friends of the Asian American Bar Association of New York. We've had programs on anti-Black racism and bias and incidents. The first day that Roger Maldonado was president of the New York City Bar, he had to deal with an anti-Hispanic incident that was happening, and so this is unfortunately what's necessary. The good news is, and I am an optimist, so the good news is we have an incredible panel, which Angie will introduce. I want to thank Angie and the staff for an incredible job in organizing this program. Needless to say, they do all the work that makes this happen. I just stand up here and say hello and welcome you, which is really nice to do. We have an incredible panel who will help us understand what we can do, and I do think that there's things that we can do, and I think it's important, and I'm grateful for all of you to be here. For those of you who are lawyers or law students or judges, I want to thank you especially because being lawyers or being judges or being law students gives you an opportunity to take action, to do something. We have a special responsibility as lawyers and members of the profession, and I'm glad to see that some of you are here. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Angie, and thank you so much for this incredible panel.
Hi again. So this program was brought to us from a longtime City Bar member, Stanley Fisher, who's now my very good friend. So Stanley reached out, and he reached out to our office and just stated that he was very upset with the state of the world and his longtime membership home, the City Bar. He didn't really see representation to that end. So after many months and weeks of planning, Stanley introduced me to Michael Cohen, who is our moderator tonight, and Michael Cohen introduced me virtually to all these amazing panelists. So I'm very thankful to him and thankful to all of our panelists for joining us this evening. And with that said, I'm going to throw it over to the man of the hour, Michael Cohen.
Good evening, everyone. Well, first of all, I want to thank everybody for coming, and I want to once again thank our incredible panel for joining us here this evening. I know I first, though, want to join Angie in thanking Stanley for all his incredible work and his vision for making sure that this happened here. Stanley, it's really your vision and your work that made sure that this issue gets the attention here it deserves tonight at the bar, and we really thank you for that. And I know why don't you come up here and say a few words of introduction and opening.
Good evening, everyone, and thank you for coming. Anti-Semitism takes many forms. Physical. My paternal grandfather was stabbed in the heart and killed during an anti-Semitic demonstration in 1905. As a result, my father, who was 1 year old at the time, was raised in an orphanage. My wife's grandfather was one of those placed in a boxcar for 3 days standing up. In Convoy 50, there's a book written on it, and taken to the extermination camp Majdanek in Poland, across Europe, to be murdered. His daughter, my mother-in-law, escaped from a concentration camp where she had been held for almost 2 years. going to show you probably one of a kind, a numbered item at Yad Vashem and the Holocaust Museum. It's a wanted poster, an arrest warrant for Elsa Solomon, my mother-in-law, for escaping from a camp. It's part of the National Archives of France. Her crime, that in May 1942 she was Jewish. Education and opportunity. One of our children was a student at Queens College of the City University of New York. And they had liberal arts, business and liberal arts. And minority students who were in business and liberal arts department were invited to a financial institution to tour, to interview, to see what it was like, possible future employment. He was told, "You're not a minority. Jews are not a minority. You're not permitted to go." In the legal profession, perhaps bring it more to home, I was for many years general counsel of a exchange-listed multinational and their chief litigator. I was assigned by the board to litigate and chair a major litigation known as the potato case, famous case in Boise, Idaho. You can figure out why Boise. Jury trial, federal case, important case. I assembled a team from the West, from Salt Lake City, from Denver, from Boise, all seasoned litigators, attorneys, specialty litigators. We prepared the case, as litigators do, and several days before the trial was to commence, was selection of a jury. My colleagues, all distinguished, all excellent attorneys, said to me, "Stan, this is difficult for us. We have a duty to tell you. A New York Jew in the courthouse during the trial will have a negative effect on the outcome of the litigation." Not talking about even in the trial room, in the courthouse. Another instance was that I represented an ethnic minority seeking to open a restaurant in a wealthy and affluent suburb of New York. Contiguous to the series of stores, which would include the restaurant, was a wealthy co-op building. And I made an appointment with the president of the Co-op Association to discuss it with him. And I recall on a Sunday morning walking in the garden of the co-op and him looking me in the eye and saying, "Hitler didn't finish the job." I want to thank you all for coming, to participating, and I hope that the panelists will present what we can all do about it and what government is striving to do about it. And I wanted one more point. I forgot who said it, but someone said, first they come for you, then they come for you, then they come for you. And eventually they come for everyone. Good evening.
Thank you so much, Stanley. And like you said, once again, thank you for all your efforts in making sure that tonight was a possibility, that tonight became a reality. Without you, we wouldn't be here. So thank you so much for everything you've done. I represent the Simon Wiesenthal Center, and the Wiesenthal Center was so happy to partner with the New York City Bar here today to make sure that we can put this together and make sure that the messages get out, that the understanding of what's really happening around our city and around our nation get out, and that we can constructively figure out, considering we're in the New York City Bar building, what legal and legislative remedies there can be, and also what the effects are. And we have a seriously, each of these panelists here today, I've had the pleasure of personally working with, and each of them are key players in New York City for many years in being the leading lights on fighting back on all kinds of hate and on anti-Semitism. And without any of these individuals here tonight, the city would be in a much worse place. So I'm really proud of to be friends with each and every one of the folks here tonight. And I look forward to you each hearing from them and hearing a lot of their expertise and their thoughts and their experiences on combating anti-Semitism, both in the legal and legislative worlds that they've been involved with for so long. So I first would like just to ask each of the panelists, I guess we'll start with the borough president, just to quickly introduce yourself and just give a quick opening statement.
All right. Thank you, Michael, my friend Michael Cohen, the good Michael Cohen. Thank you to the bar for hosting us, and thank you, Stanley, for instigating this and for that incredibly powerful, moving, disturbing statement, which I think appropriately frames the stakes. And I'm looking forward to answering the question you posed. What can we do? What can all of us do? What can government do? I am very happy to be sitting next to my friend, Eric Dinowitz, an outstanding city council member and chair of the Jewish Caucus. You're going to get a sense of how wonderful he is. And I don't know Avi Farkas, but his boss, DA in Brooklyn, is doing an outstanding job. And to Hassan Naveed, who you'll hear from as well, he's been a great leader for the Department of Hate Crime, Office of Hate Crimes. So really a great lineup here. I'm sorry that this panel is necessary, but it is. And I applaud the bar for being unafraid to highlight this topic, and I'm grateful to all of you for coming here tonight. I'm looking forward to this discussion. Thank you.
And I would also add that the bar president was the previous chair of the Jewish Caucus in the council, and has been at times when anti-Semitism really started its surge, was also the author of the legislation to build the office that Hassan now has. So you're talking about folks here who don't just talk, but folks here who seriously lead and have an impact. So really, thank you, Borough President.
Thank you, Michael.
We have Eric Dinowitz, Councilman and Chair of the Jewish Caucus and Chair of the Higher Ed Committee.
Thank you, Mike. I feel a little sheepish up here next to Mark Levine, who has an incredible. When I just like on a personal note, when I joined the council in a special election in April of 2021, and so it was towards the end of most people's term, and soon thereafter I became chair of the Jewish Caucus. He said you should become the chair, and I was I'll be honest, I was very nervous because I was the new kid on the block, but Mark said very comforting words, and I hope I've done enough to make you proud. To make you proud. And Stanley, thank you for your words. I know it's often very hard to talk about the pain and the discomfort and sort of the bad things that happen to us. There's sometimes shame, but people don't always want to talk about it. But unfortunately, we have to. And I think especially in the Jewish community, there's a sort of uniqueness that you touched on, which is, if you're on the far right, and I'm gonna bring politics into this. It is what it is. If you're on the far right, I'm not white. I'm a Jewish person. There's the replacement theory I think you've all heard about. Jews will not replace us, all that. And if you're on the left, you're not a minority. You're not in a position where you may need help in one area or another. There's really, it almost feels often like there's no place to be Jewish. And these conversations are very important. And I know tonight we're going to talk more about the work that we're doing to push back against that. And I just want to thank everyone here again for coming, for engaging, to Michael, to Stanley, and to the New York City Bar, to Brett, to everyone for hosting this and for being engaged.
No, thank you so much. And just on a personal note, the councilman also, when we saw anti-Semitism rising on college campuses, and over the last year, 2 years, the councilman made sure to boldly hold hearings, calling our colleges and CUNY and everyone to task at a public hearing at the New York City Council to make sure, once again, to shine the light on what's actually going on. So really, thank you so much for your leadership, and we look forward to having you here tonight. Hassan Navid, who is the Executive Director of the Office of Hate Crime Prevention for the City of New York.
Thank you so much, Michael. Hassan Navid, the Executive Director for the Office for the Prevention of Hate Crimes. We're in the New York City Mayor's office. I wanted to also thank you, Stanley. I think it's so important. I'm not Jewish, I'm Muslim, but at the same time, I think you said it best. An attack on one community is an attack on all communities. It's an attack on very much the democracy that we have that really brings us together and what makes New York City so unique. At the same time, I also want to thank folks on the panel too. Thank you, Borough President Levine, for my job. Councilmember Dinowitz and also Ari Farkas. These are folks who have worked in this arena for a very long time. I can say we all keep in touch, we all talk to each other, and I'm excited to be able to talk more about my office, what it is exactly, what role it plays, and how it is one of the first offices of its kind in this country. And so you'll get to know more about what this strategy for the city looks like in combating hate crimes. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Hassan. And just my little ad lib here. There are a lot of entities throughout the city that want to have an understanding and a greater understanding of what's going on in the city in fighting anti-Semitism. And throughout small panels with 15 people in them throughout the city, every time one is needed, Hassan's usually the first call. And I don't think I think he forgot the word no. So you're talking about somebody who, whether it was running in the middle of a Sunday to City Island or Canarsie on a different time, you're talking about true dedication here, and really proud to have you here. And we have Ari Farkas from the Hate Crimes Bureau of the Brooklyn District Attorney's Office.
Good evening, everyone. My name's Ari Farkas. I grew up in Brooklyn. I've always been a city kid. I joined the DA's office. Before I begin, thank you to everyone on the panel. Thank you to everyone on the panel. Thank you to Mr. Fisher. Again, so I joined the DA's office in 2005. I've always known that I wanted to be a prosecutor. And as cases around the city of anti-Semitism kind of were on the rise and all anti-hate was on the rise, my boss, Eric Gonzalez, who decided at that time, back in 2018, created the first standalone bureau of all the 5 DA's offices here. It's actually still the only standalone bureau of the DA's office. We have 7 prosecutors that are dedicated solely to hate crimes. That's any type of hate crime. That's anti-Semitism, that's anti-Black, anti-white, anti-LGBTQ, anti-Muslim, any other type of specific hate crime. We have 7 prosecutors on staff. And when he started that, I asked to be a part of it, and he named me the deputy bureau chief, the deputy director of that unit, and I've been there since. We prosecute every single hate crime that comes through Brooklyn, only Brooklyn. But we speak to all the other district attorney's offices. We're all in conjunction, try to get a handle on what's going on in the city. It is again, as I said, a standalone bureau, which also gives us access to detective investigators to investigate these cases. We investigate the social media of the perpetrators. We investigate videos. We try our best to really go out above and beyond to make sure that each case that we have of a hate crime is prosecuted to the fullest extent of the law. And as the rise, in in all hate crimes is happening. We've been given more paralegals to do it. So we have a unit currently of about 10 people that all work solely on hate crimes. And again, I'm happy to continue to talk tonight, but thank you again for having us on the panel.
Well, thank you, Ari. And Ari, who I've had the benefit of knowing probably almost my entire life. And he's not sick of me yet, so we're doing well. But that unit and what Ari has really brought is when people around the city have questions about hate crimes, about whether something's a hate crime, about the details of whether that the average person may not understand in this particular case. Their phones are open, their doors are open, just to make sure to provide information, whether it's behind the scenes a lot of time. There's so much that they do that doesn't get reported, doesn't get noticed, but is critical to making sure that perpetrators of hate crimes around the city know that there's somebody out there making sure that justice is served. So really, thank you, Ari.
Thank you.
So for our panel tonight, our first question, a little bit of an easy one, but an important one. Each of you has a defined role to play in ensuring the protection of the major Jewish communities that you serve. You've all seen this surge of anti-Semitism over the last couple of years. And each of you, if you can begin tonight by giving a little bit of an overview of, in your particular jurisdictions, what you're seeing specifically, what your defined role is in dealing with what it is that you're seeing, just to start to kick us off. So I guess start with the Borough President, and I guess the next question will start the other direction.
Fair enough. Start the softballs on this side and then do the...
Give us time to think.
Yeah, exactly.
Got to warm up.
I'm going to share with you some statistics on the number of hate crimes in Manhattan and in New York, and they tell a really disturbing story. I think you know this. I think everyone in this room is aware that it seems like whatever happens each year, this is getting worse. In 2019, there were 65 anti-Semitic hate crimes in the borough of Manhattan. We had a reduction in 2020, went down to 26. It's come roaring back in 2021, 75. 2022, it was 102. That's more than any other borough in the city, in a state which has more anti-Semitic incidents than any other in the country. And in fact, if you look just at physical assaults, anti-Semitic assaults, New York has more than every other state in the country combined. In New York City, those are, plurality are in Brooklyn. Thank goodness we had the DA Gonzalez there fighting for us, but many are in Manhattan as well. And some of the incidents will be well known to you. In November, we had a near miss with two young men who were apprehended in Penn Station after having posted on social media that they were planning an attack on synagogues. They were apprehended with significant weaponry and a plan they were ready to put into action. It was not government which uncovered this plot. It was really a combined effort of the ADL and something called the Community Safety Initiative that detected this. It's alarming that it took outside action. There's many others. I think some of you remember when Ramah's school was stoned on Kristallnacht a few months ago. It seems like no matter the conditions nationally, we're continuing to march in the wrong direction. I had hoped that when we had a less incendiary president in the White House, perhaps this would recede, but it hasn't. The genie is out of the bottle. And I hope we're going to talk tonight about what we need to do about it. But certainly in my office, because of my bully pulpit, because of my impact on the budget, because of my ability to introduce legislation, we are making sure that we do not stop paying attention to this, that we call it out, that we are unafraid to denounce these incidents when they occur, no matter how many they are, that we marshal the resources that we need to address this in every sector of city government, from not just law enforcement, but in schools, in our Human Rights Commission, in our Department of Mental Health, and so much more. We need a multi-front effort, and we need attorneys in this fight. We need the Bar Association in this fight. I think there's a role for every single one of you in this room, whether you work in law enforcement or not. We'll talk about that, but it's important that we're here at the bar. We need the legal profession. We need legal minds focused on this. I do feel better being in a room of allies who get this, and I'm excited for the conversation ahead. Councilmember.
Thank you.
Okay,
Councilman.
thank you, Mr. President. I think whenever he speaks, we all have to stand up and salute. Okay, that's what we'll do for the rest of the night.
No way.
So my I guess official title is council member. I chair the Higher Education Committee, chair the Jewish Caucus. But I think of my role as multifaceted. So you heard some of the statistics, the horrifying statistics about assaults, and I'm sure you'll hear, not to put words in your mouth, but probably from the DA's office, they see the assaults. And that's what we see on the news. We see sort of that endpoint of hate. And in my role, I used to be a public school special education teacher, and that's the value that I bring to the council. In my role, have tried to address sort of those starting points, the seeds of hate, the things that come before the assaults. I'm not an enforcement arm. I have a smaller bully pulpit than the Mr. President. So I'll just go through a few of the things I've done. Michael already mentioned CUNY. And with the hearing, we actually got real results. We had a 7-hour hearing, and we really kept the pressure on CUNY. And since that time, we pushed CUNY to create a reporting portal so that people, it's an anti-discrimination portal, acts of bias portal, that anyone facing bias or discrimination can report it centrally. Because before that point, students were confused, they didn't know when or how to report it. It was different at every school. And so we got them to create a centralized reporting system. They invested $1 million in that system and in investing in groups like Hillels at different schools, but not just to talk amongst themselves, to work with other non-Jewish groups, to build those bridges between communities. When I was teaching in the Bronx, and every single year, I would tell students I was Jewish. I would tell them I'm taking off for Sukkot, and invariably they would always ask, "Oh, where's your hat thingy? Where's your curly things?" And I was like, "Wait, you've never met a Jewish person before. You've never had an interaction with a Jewish person before." And I just imagine those students are all out there. They haven't met me, haven't met a Jewish person, and then they see their favorite music artist or their favorite basketball player spewing nonsense on social media. And what are they going to think? And so part of my other work has been to really invest in those initiatives and those groups that build bridges between Jewish and non-Jewish communities. We got an extra $275,000 in citywide initiatives in this year's budget to do just that, to prevent hate crimes before people even know what they are, to build real relationships with people. And of course, building bridges with my colleagues. I'm actually working with the Wiesenthal Center right now on a sort of fireside chat with a diverse group of council members and a diverse group of victims of hate crimes to talk about the similarities, the differences, and importantly, the mental health impacts that those hate crimes have on that person and on the community. Because from my perspective, we talk about the hate crimes, but really so much of what we heard earlier, Hitler didn't finish the job, right? Though that is not an uncommon thing for people to hear, but it doesn't get reported. It's not an assault, but those are the seeds and the underlying things which I and the council am trying to address.
And just quickly, I'll say, when we talk about the fireside chat that the councilman is leading, when we first looked at who we were looking at co-hosting initially and how that group has grown to other associations, other caucuses through his leadership, to have the Jewish Caucus chair showing that kind of leadership on hate crimes, showing and where they obviously understand that anti-Semitism is now going to be a part of that conversation, is an incredible asset to have in the council with your leadership. So really, thank you for that. And just one quick thing to add on to what you said, when people don't realize that they haven't met somebody from the Jewish community before. And I'll never forget when I was working on the Hill some 2 decades ago, there was an office that I passed every single day on my way to my office, and collegially, we'd wave to a person in the front of another office that we passed by all the time. And one day, that individual calls me over, and you see this person looking to both sides quickly, trying to scout out the area, and looks at me and whispers, "I'm from the tribe too." And the fact that this person was so scared to say that on the Hill, just shows you also the mentality of where people think anti-Semitism is really at, and it's a really scary thing to think. Hassan?
Thank you so much. So I've been in this position at the Office for the Prevention of Hate Crimes, or I've been in the office since its beginning in 2019. And as you may have recalled, in 2019, we saw an increase in hate crimes, and we saw what happened at the tail end of it with the horrible tragedy in Muncie in New York. And so we, at that time, I had just been onboarded at that time, and we were really trying to figure out, well, how can we structure this office based on what the council members have put together? And what we did was we created this office. First of all, it was an office of its kind, the first office of its kind, and it was an office that was intentionally taking on hate crimes, bias, and discrimination collectively, right? In a way where we were looking for, I call it the 3 C's. It was a coordinated, consistent, and comprehensive strategy. What does that mean? That basically means that we wanted to ensure that across the city itself too, right? Is DOE talking to NYPD? Are the DAs talking to each other? What are we doing to be able to ensure that the city itself is consistently and comprehensively, whether it's a law enforcement response or it's an educational response within the schools, is collectively working to address this issue overall? And so we brought this interagency committee together to be able to build out this strategy and also begin to realize that there were things that we wanted to particularly focus on. One is community relations. And we are fortunate that Mayor Adams is funding roughly, I think it's 60 organizations throughout the city on hate crime prevention work right now. And 18 of those organizations are Jewish organizations. We work closely with the Jewish Community Relations Council, the JCRC, which has been really the main facilitator in terms of bringing some of these smaller organizations that represent smaller Jewish communities, like the Bukharan Jews out in Rego Park, or whatever other communities are out there, to be able to engage them in education, hate crime prevention, what to do when something happens, connect them with their precinct locally. But at the same time, with these community relations, the mayor has also worked towards, and we launched Breaking Bread Building Bonds, which is exactly what was mentioned earlier, is really bringing people together from different communities to sit down at a table and have some basic conversations. And some of the questions that come up at these dinner tables itself are, when was the first time you felt unwelcomed? And so far, we've launched the program about a month ago, and we are looking to have 1,000 of these dinners itself. And we've had roughly 500 to 600 people sign up already. We've had organizations themselves that are eager, who can see the certain circumstances we're in right now with the anti-Semitism, with the rise in hate crimes, and especially domestic extremism. Folks really want to be able to have that eagerness of joining each other, as well as these organizations that we're funding are also looking to be able to put these on. And so far, we've had 33 dinners already just in the last month, right, which I think is pretty cool. And that's touched about 300 people so far. In addition to that, we also are working on a hate crime curriculum. It's so important for us to be able to make sure that youth, that people in our schools understand the impact of hate crimes, that they understand the history. They also understand what resources are available out there. Listen, nowadays when an incident happens, what worries me the most is that you have a kid that goes on, puts in the incident on Google, and I don't know what algorithm is going to pop up in terms of a search result. We know the impact that social media has on youth, and we've seen how it ends up being something of a carrier for some of the crazy stuff that we've seen athletes or other folks say out there. And so what does media literacy look like? What does it look like when we have youth be able to go to the right resources that we provide while working with the ADL, while working with Michael, while working with other Jewish organizations as well too? And at the same time, training teachers to be able to have these conversations in spaces where students are asking, what just happened in my neighborhood? Or these are just so important aspects of us being able to work on this education front. And then also lastly, law enforcement. our comprehensive strategy, yes, community-based approaches. Those 60 organizations that we fund are doing community-based approaches towards preventing hate and responding to hate crimes, because we're still in this situation where we can prevent, but the response is so large. The numbers that exist are underreported. We have to live within the context that hate crime numbers are underreported. And so with that, for us to be able to really end up engaging with all city agencies and really figuring out a strategy to be able to address this issue and take it on is important too. And so we as city agencies collectively meet on a quarterly basis to be able to discuss trends, discuss issues that are happening throughout the city, identify particular places, and figure out ways that we can actually intervene in those locations. And so I'll talk more about this in a bit, but I'll continue onwards. Thank you.
Thank you, Hassan. Ari?
So as a prosecutor, it's a little bit more difficult sometimes to go out and prevent some of these crimes. We often see them when they first come in, and then it's a matter of approach about how and what we do with that case and with that individual once, unfortunately, the crime has already been committed. So when we have cases where, an anti-Semitism occurred, we have to take that case very seriously, and we have to judge the person based on, why this happened. We have to make a determination about what was really the motivation. And once the hate crime is actually charged, then we have to make a determination at that point what the punishment would be. And these are all serious cases and serious issues, because again, as we said, some of the cases involve mental health issues. Some of them involve juveniles. Some of them involve just real ignorance of just no knowledge of what's going on. And so with each case, we determine what a punishment would be, but we need to make the punishment lasting, something that really makes an impact, because as it's been said before, one hate crime doesn't affect just one person. Someone who gets robbed on a subway, that person's a victim of a crime, and it's terrible, and it's a horrible thing for that person to be robbed. But once you go ahead and punch someone in the face and commit an assault on that person because of a bias, because of anti-Semitism, it doesn't just affect that one person. It affects everyone around that person. It affects that person's community. It affects that whole, group together. And so we have to make sure that a punishment actually has a lasting impact to show that these crimes are serious and there is something, that we do take more seriously in them. That being said, the DA, or our DA in Brooklyn, gives us, as the Hate Crime Bureau, we have a directive to go and do teaching, because teaching is important and knowledge is really the most important. So over the course of the past few years, we've done it on Zoom, we've done it in person, we go out and have our own program. It's not a program that we have with the Department of Education, but it's certainly, we do presentations, and we're happy to do a presentation to schools, to synagogues, to offices, to churches, to a number of different groups, and we have a presentation, and it shows real world cases, because a lot of times what you see in the news and what you see glorified in the news sometimes, they're on the surface, the news will tell you one way and you'll see certain parts of it. You're not going to see all the evidence in the case. But when you look at the case as a whole, when you look at the person, then we could really show you why this is a hate crime. It's difficult to just immediately see something and categorize it as a hate crime. We have to look at everything, but it's important for people to see all of the evidence of that. And that means if there's a graffiti incident, which we see a lot of, we want to show people what those things mean and how those things are hurtful. When you put a graffiti symbol, a swastika, for example, on a certain place in a certain location where there are children walking by, where there are Holocaust victims walking by, sometimes the people that are committing these things don't know the harm. They don't know what that really means. And it's very important to go out. So knowledge is important. Education to the younger community and to all of the communities is of paramount importance, because some people out there just really don't know. And also taking into account, mental health is also very important. So we have to really assess everything. But, from our DA's point of view, it's not just, oh, we'll take the case once the case comes in as a prosecution. We also have to go out there. And so we work with the ADL, we work with the Simon Wiesenthal Center, we work with the JCRC as well, with the Community Service Initiative on cases. They can tell us if they see something online, if there's a trend. We also work with the NYPD Hate Crimes Task Force that is also detectives that are solely working on these types of cases. And if we see something out there, we mention it to them so they do an investigation. If they see something that they need our help, but we work together with them in tandem to try to really approach it. But if they're to really get our hands on all of the evidence for once we do have a case and actually can present it to the grand jury if need be, or presenting it to court. But really what we have found, at least from our position, is that education is key. It's younger people are out there and they don't know, or they've learned it from their parents. And they've learned it from what their parents are saying at home. They're learning from what their parents are doing at home, and that's really the problem. And obviously, teaching their parents is very important, but a lot of the newer generation where we see a lot of this coming to the surface, I think the education and really teaching them what the harm is and how those things truly hurt would really help the next generation.
Thank you so much, Ari. Considering we're starting on this side this time, I think I think this next question is apropos to start with the district attorney's office, especially considering that we're in the bar and trying to figure out some of the legislative and legal remedies and situations here. So the next question is, with the current high-profile anti-Semitic cases now being prosecuted, such as the Joseph Borgen case and the case that the borough president mentioned earlier from Penn Station, the Mara case, with those being talked about throughout the regional Jewish world, there has been talk that the current New York State hate crime statute perhaps is not comprehensive enough to ensure that prosecutors have the sufficient means to seek appropriate justice that they believe is the current law allows them to do. Do you believe, in light of these legal conversations of late, and in light of these cases, that the current hate crimes law needs to be strengthened, or do you think there are loopholes that need to be closed? Or what do you think we can do better when it comes to dealing with the hate crime statute in New York to make sure that all of us are better prepared and better armed to deal with these kinds of dramatic cases that we've seen?
So I am a representative of the district attorney in Brooklyn. I am not the district attorney. And I can speak to you from what my experience is. I can't speak to you what his policy position would be on some of these issues. But there's certainly there's an interesting fact with the way the hate crime statute is. A lot of the people don't know what that law really means, and they don't know what a hate crime is. The media will immediately say something is a hate crime, declare it a hate crime. You'll see something on TV yourself and sometime immediately say, oh, that should be a hate crime. But that's also education to the community also about what hate crimes are, but also sometimes what hate crimes are not, because there are differences. In order to an actual hate crime, a person has to commit the hate crime or a specified offense of the penal code when they select the person or they intentionally commit the act against a specific person. When this offense is constituted in whole or in substantial part based on this bias. And that's an important factor. The fact that you are committing an assault against a visibly Jewish person with nothing else there is sometimes just an assault on someone who is visibly Jewish. And there are factors that we have to take into account. And whole or substantial part is certainly an interesting burden, and it's a difficult burden sometimes. But in criminal cases, you don't actually have to prove a motive, why someone punched someone in the face, and if, for example. But with a hate crime, you actually have to go out and prove that motive. So that's another burden for us to bear on those cases. And so it's important for us, that's why we take everything into consideration. Was there anyone else walking on the street during that time? If there are 5 people walking on the street and the only person that is targeted was a Jewish person, that's one factor. Was something said during the course of the commission of the offense? That's another factor. and this is where we get the point, we can actually go ahead because of our paralegals and because the NYPD Hate Crimes Task Force, we can look at the social media of the person. If someone has, hate in the past, if they've posted, because now everyone is posting things, and if they posted something on Instagram, on Twitter, or any of these platforms that has additional hate language in it, then these are all factors that help us going out to actually prove the motive of what this person committed, and why this person committed that crime. And so I think it's important to note, though, that there are times that without those other factors, it is a difficult burden to bear to make that case. And I think sometimes when you want to, if we were to expand that language to just be, a hate crime was committed against a specific person and that's automatically a hate crime, from my experience, it is very difficult to make that standard because you have to prove why. And lay people who don't see that every day and don't understand, they won't pick up as to why that happened and why was this person targeted. And so that goes, we have to, as prosecutors, go out and gather additional evidence and to make sure we understand why. And so that's why sometimes it takes a little bit longer in order for us to make a determination if a hate crime was actually committed. So sometimes you'll see in the media an incident happen and then you won't hear about it right away as if it was determined or it wasn't determined as a hate crime, because we have to lay those grounding steps into the grand jury. We have to present that additional evidence. And so it takes a while for us sometimes to do it. And so that is, I think that to immediately arrest someone for a hate crime sometimes is jarring. And I think that it's important for us to make sure that we have all our eggs in a basket before we present the grand jury. I think have everything laid out for us. And so I think it's important for, as a community, yes, we want all of these cases to be prosecuted. And if it is a hate crime, it should be determined as a hate crime, to the fullest and prosecuted to the fullest extent of the law, but sometimes have some patience with the DA's offices across the city in order to make sure that they have all the evidence at their fingertips. One final note, that it's always important to note that if you see something that you think is a hate crime and that you see it immediately, which in the media immediately, declares it as a hate crime, just because and then in the end it's not actually prosecuted as a hate crime, it's always important to note that that case is still being prosecuted. It's not as if that case is just going to go away. If we can't prove those other elements, because again, all of this is an additional element for us to be able to prove. If we can't prove that, that doesn't mean the case gets dismissed. That case is still being prosecuted, and then that person will still be punished, and there will be consequences for that person's actions. So I think that, reviewing the statutes, again, I can't speak to policy, but I can certainly speak to, from what we see when we present things to the grand jury, there are times that we feel that we've taken cases, we've tried our best to present them to the grand jury, but with none of those other factors, the grand jury cannot and does not find that. Even with that, they don't find that as a hate crime. We've had a number of cases where we've tried to present it to the grand jury and the grand jurors don't find it as a hate crime. And again, there's sometimes, I would say that what we see is borderline cases. And as the DA's office, we try to present them to the grand jury. And we think that it deserves the care and to be able to present it to the grand jury as a hate crime. And sometimes the grand jury just doesn't give us, I guess you can say, the hate crime. But again, that we still take that case. That's still a case that's being prosecuted by the Hate Crimes Bureau, and it has all of the available resources for that person, victim services, and obviously our hate crimes prosecutor that are designated to that field.
Thank you so much, Ari. Hassan?
So I'm not a prosecutor, I'm not a lawyer, I'm a policy person. So I'm going to take this question and answer it within sort of the education and community relations portion of this. When we started up our office, we went and conducted a number of presentations called Preventing Hate Together. And that presentation itself provided the basics of what a hate crime is, what a bias incident is, what the numbers are, who's impacted, how they're impacted, where it's happening. This information was something that we did probably 150 different town halls through the course of 2 years in multiple languages. At one point I was wearing, a headset, and channel 1 was English, channel 2 was Mandarin, channel 3. The point was, what we realized through the course of all this was that we're dealing with a really diverse population here in New York City. People with different experiences from their homelands as well too. What governance looks like, what rule of law looks like abroad, how people take, what the process of just hate crimes or bias incidents are. And in many ways, we had to end up really meeting communities where they were at, right? To be able to see, well, this is what a hate crime is, what a biased incident is, and this is what the process of it looks like overall. And I think that's something extremely important because it is at times a really complex situation. Who's has the case in their hand? Where is it moving along? And then who's classifying it as a hate crime? Is it being prosecuted as such? These sorts of questions are things that everyday New Yorkers who are not involved within the legal sort of apparatus itself or are not too familiar with. And so to be able to have that and have partners like the DA's offices or the NYPD Hate Crimes Task Force be a part of that conversation has been extremely, extremely informative. Our first event was virtual. We hit 1,500 people trying to get onto WebEx to listen to what we had to say because it was such a need at that time, and we're still seeing that need as it's coming out. I also just wanted to say that when it comes to community relations, we have to take proactive measures. And in terms of sufficient, I would love for us to be able to really put more resources towards community efforts. And I want to give an example of some of the stuff that our organizations have done on the ground. One Crown Heights, for example, is an organization in Crown Heights, Brooklyn. And there's an organization that it is a part of that does recreational activities between young Jewish, Latino, and Black men. Basketball. Sports, something so small, but the impact of that itself is so great. These communities are not necessarily talking to each other. We're living in silos in this city in many extent. We have to break them down. And so to be able to really build those bridges with credible messengers, organizations that are invested in this is extremely important. So those are the kind of projects that we are very interested in, as well as there's another program called Around the World. It's taking youth from one part of the city to another part of the city. And get this, some of them haven't gone to other part of the city at all. And so to be able to have them go into a community, and these are youth who are coming from various different community organizations and communities, right? So there's Middle Eastern youth, there's Latino youth, there's all across the board, but really getting them to realize, like, look at our city, look at the diversity here. And for them to be able to go to Queens or go to the Bronx or go to other parts and be able to be welcomed in and be able to see what the city has to offer in terms of its diversity is so key. And yes, it is surprising, but it is true. People don't end up going to other boroughs. And last but not least, I like to really shout out this particular program because it's something unique. The JCRC started up a fellowship that really brought a number of different nonprofit leaders together from various communities collectively to really align and mobilize around discussing hate and around addressing it, and collectively as a diverse community, right? And figuring out ways to be able to come up with tools, other sorts of skills to go back to their nonprofits that represent their communities, to be able to integrate them into their efforts. It's really expanded our network quite extensively. And it's given access to the Jewish organization, all organizations that are there into other and different parts of the city. So we continue to grow at that regard.
Thank you so much, Hassan. And just say, I have the pleasure of serving on One Crown Heights. And as you've seen, you hear about, we all know what happened in Crown Heights 30 years ago. But you've also seen over the last 30 years, we haven't seen that situation happen again based on a lot of that work that was being done. Not perfect, but the efforts on the ground, those kind of efforts are having a significant impact on a daily basis. Councilman?
Well, I love everything Hassan said. Everything from, no, I shouldn't say love, because I agree with, when he was talking about youth not seeing other parts of the city. When I was teaching in the Bronx, we would take a trip downtown to see a Broadway show, and people were looking up at the tall buildings like they were from some farm town, not in New York or upstate New York, Yonkers and above, which is upstate. Wow. And it was interesting. He was talking about what is a hate crime. One of, I don't think I mentioned this earlier, one of the initiatives that I'm working on with Councilmember Menon is a community forum with just that, which is saying, what is a hate crime? How do we report a hate crime? What does it look like? And, we're looking at making a toolkit. There's all sorts of other initiatives we're doing. And I just put this on Hassan today. It's going to be part of it. And working with the DOE, working with the youth to make sure that they're engaged in this. And I'm also going to announce a piece of legislation I'm working on because that I introduced. We were talking about laws and statutes. Part of hate crimes and hate crimes prevention is making sure information is out there. As it stands now, community boards and city council members are notified by email anytime there's a violent hate crime, anytime a violent hate crime is being investigated. That's in the law. And we receive an email within, I think, 24 to 48 hours. Community is notified. In my view, I don't think a hate crime has to be violent for a community to know about it. And we've seen our share of swastikas to know that's not true. So my bill simply strikes the word violent from the statute and says anytime there's something being investigated by the Office of Prevention of Hate Crimes, the community will be notified. I was one of those lay people that Ari was talking about. I'm also not a lawyer, but I think what's important to recognize is, one, a lot of the criminal statutes are really involved in the state. So in the city council, we're not legislating the hate crimes provisions. One thing I wish more people would recognize, and I think that everyone here does, is that a hate crime, let's just go with assaults, isn't just an assault. And it isn't just the person who's assaulted who feels the pain. It is fear and anxiety among an entire community, especially if you know of persons attacked for being Jewish, Black, LGBTQ, Muslim. That entire community is going to feel that fear and anxiety knowing someone is out there, or there is a sentiment out there that someone's attacking you for who you are. Not that any assault is good or makes you feel good, but there's that extra level of pain. There's an extra level of empathy. And that's why these statutes are so important. But what's extra important, I think, for the lawyers in the room is this. It's your engagement with political, with elected officials and in politics. You are the ones who may be trying cases. Maybe one day you'll be a judge and you'll have to determine what the sentence is going to be. Whatever judges do these days, I don't actually know what they do. But what we're hearing in some cases is that the statutes aren't always clear, or they're not actually addressing the needs that you see by interviewing victims or by working with the prosecutors or defendants. And so it's very important that your voices are in the room to ensure, outside of what the punishment should be, just that the laws are clear and you are using your experience in the courtroom to help lawmakers like myself, like Borough President Levine, to ensure that we are writing legislation and amending legislation in a way that makes it easier for you to do your job to address hate crimes.
Thank you so much, Councilman.
Thank you.
Mr. President?
Well, I understand that in the law you have to have very strict definitions for purposes of charging and prosecuting. At the same time, there's just no denying that visibly Jewish people are being disproportionately targeted in assaults in New York City. And that includes many cases where there is not a hate crimes charge, and where the stated reason may be that it was not possible to ascertain motive. But in total, there is no doubt there's something happening here. And that even applies in cases where the suspect is grappling with mental illness. And it's often dismissed as, well, you can't really say that they were anti-Semitic because they weren't aware they were doing what they were doing. But again, there's a disproportionate targeting, and they're getting it from somewhere. It's in the culture now. It's on social media now. It's penetrating even people who are struggling in their cognitive state. And while we may not be able to prosecute unless very strict criteria is met, there's the question of when we're even investigating as hate crimes. And in too many cases, it has taken public pressure from folks like Eric and myself to even get a case taken up by the hate crimes unit. And virtually every case when folks like Eric and me call for investigations, the hate crime unit will respond. But what about all the cases that aren't on our radar, that don't come to the attention of the media or to elected officials? And so I do think we need to probably work with local precincts and the people on the ground who are making these decisions in real time about when the hate crimes unit should at least investigate. There, I think we can be more flexible on criteria. And then we have to, I think the broader charge of all of us here and a theme tonight is we have to address what it is in the culture that is leading people to disproportionately target Jewish New Yorkers. And it starts in education. I'm here with an educator who knows that we're not doing enough to teach Jewish history in schools and to teach the history of the Holocaust in the schools and genocides more broadly. And the survey results are appalling. Most people in the millennial Gen Z generation can't even identify one concentration camp. And very few can make an approximation of the number of Jews murdered in the Holocaust and other core facts that they're missing. And yes, that's ultimately connected to people's propensity to be susceptible to anti-Semitic ideology. So we have to attack this on multiple fronts. I apologize that I don't know whether we're going to have time for me to come back before I have to leave at 7:30, but depending on where you go in the order.
So you're going to go first.
Okay, great. I'll stop that question. Thank you. Yeah.
Yeah, we have I said just about 6 or 7 minutes left to this segment. So I just, I'll cut to a critical question that I know is on all our minds is we're sitting here at the New York City Bar, which is, obviously one of the most prominent bar associations in the country. And on these issues, we've heard a lot about what the Jewish community is facing. But as a takeaway for members of the bar, for those who are here in the audience and those who are going to be watching on the recorded version, can you talk for a second about what can the New York City Bar do? What can the New York City Bar, either as an association or individual members, do to help the work that you're doing, to help the people on this panel are doing, or to help the work that the bar is doing on these issues? And I'm making a difference in a very serious, impactful way to really combine with all the efforts that we've heard here today in a much larger way.
Sure. Well, I think you've done something really important by convening this panel, and I commend you for that. There are, I think, many urgent questions that demand the minds of lawyers. There are really difficult legal questions about hate on social media because of federal regulations, which have essentially absolved platforms of any responsibility for the content that they are pushing forward. We need you as legal minds figuring out how to improve those laws. We have very difficult questions about the tension between our commitment to free speech and our commitment to protect people from vicious, venomous, anti-Semitic hate. And I don't have the tools, not being a lawyer, to know how to litigate that, but we need you grappling with those questions. And some of you might be in law enforcement, and I hope you'll take to heart some of the ideas that we're pushing forward today. Some of you can help us with legislative tools here at the city level and at the state level as well. I think it's urgent that the legal profession focus on this. There's tools that only you can bring to bear. And I would love to partner with the bar on these issues in my capacity as borough president. And I'm pretty sure that Councilmember Dinowitz would agree with that. So If I don't get a chance to speak again before I have to sadly depart at 7:30, I want to say this has been really an incredibly informative discussion. I learned a lot. I learned a lot from all three of you, and from you too, Michael. And I hope this is the beginning of an ongoing dialogue. We have much more work to do on this, but thank you. I was really honored to be part of this.
Thank you so much. Really, thank you so much for being here, and you're, for many, many years you've been a leader on these issues, and we look forward to continuing to partner with you and continuing to be the beneficiaries of your leadership.
Thank you.
Councilman?
And even though you're all the way in Manhattan, I'm in the Bronx, I appreciate your leadership as well. I think you're doing a great job.
Thank you.
But I sort of want to echo one of the points that the borough president made, which is sort of that question about the First Amendment and free speech, both as it relates to social media, but we've seen things, subway ads and things of that nature. The question isn't, for me, just about constitutionality of speech. That is sort of, I would say, your expertise. I think it's fair to say it's your expertise. But I often think what's missing from those conversations is the recognition that words harm, and that when you start using certain language, we then see violence against the Jewish community. I mean, we see this anytime there is an uprising of violence in Israel. Then we see the rhetoric get very heated, and that line between Israel and Jews just gets so blurred, and then Jews get attacked in the streets. I mean, that's, this speech is allowed. I won't get into my feelings about it, but it is an important component of the conversation to say what is legal, but also what is appropriate, and what are the tools we have to elevate these important conversations. The issue isn't just that the speech exists. As was mentioned by the borough president, and I mentioned earlier, a lot of it has to do with education. And the truth is, people should be able to see bad speech or speech that is harmful and not be influenced by it, and be resilient enough to know that that's nonsense, or as was mentioned earlier, be media savvy enough to know that they can, Google something and see about facts themselves. So that goes into one of the other things that I think as the Bar Association and lawyers you can do is, what do you want to see coming out of colleges and coming out of high schools? You are in the profession. One of the hearings we had was about K-16 initiatives, K through college initiatives, and we've had other hearings about workforce development. And there's always this question for me as chair of higher ed is, what is the through line between that? What are the conversations and meetings that you are having with our higher ed? What is it you want to see from them? Of course, being media savvy enough, or being able to, fact check hateful language or be resilient to hateful language, I think is an important skill for any human to have, let alone a lawyer. And I'm about to get in some trouble here, but I don't care, clearly. One of the issues that we faced is CUNY law passed. The faculty and the students passed their pro-BDS resolution. I don't want this to become an Israel thing, but it's hard not to be. It's hard not to get into that conversation. Legitimate disagreement with Israeli government and policy, I think, stands in stark contrast to completely boycotting Israel and supporting movements that map out where Jewish organizations in Boston are and whose founders do not want to recognize Israel's existence. And for me, that calls into question if someone who graduates law school is going to be a lawyer, either, has chosen a position that they don't really understand, or they have what I view as not the best judgment and perspective of sort of the world. And so as lawyers, I would certainly open up those difficult conversations with your feeder schools, whether they be law schools or the colleges, and have difficult conversations both about sort of what I would consider curricular things. Again, the resiliency to hate speech, being able to search things, media savvy, and sort of having conversations about these hot button political issues like BDS. And the third thing I will just repeat that I think we can do in this room is, again, engage with elected officials and say, from your perspective, you have a unique perspective and a unique expertise. Tell our elected officials, me included, what it is you need to see to fight hate crimes, to support to support the education, and to make your jobs easier as it relates to the law.
Thank you so much. And let me tell you, we're blessed to have a caucus chair. Well, we've had blessed to have two consecutive amazing caucus chairs. You on the council, you're just very lucky to have individuals like this who, it doesn't matter what time of night, it doesn't matter when, the thoughtful approach to everything that happens at the council, the desire to be active, the desire to hold hearings, the desire to say, if something happens, I don't care what time it is, call me, I want to know about it. Even the ability to disrupt the councilman's Passover vacation last year. But the reality is those kind of relationships and that kind of partnership should not be taken for granted. And really, thank you, Councilman, for all that you do. And we have just a few minutes left of this segment, so let me go right to Hassan.
Yeah, thank you so much. I was going to add that, I want to read you just two real quick stats here that I think are really important to mention. According to the city's Commission on Human Rights survey on bias, discrimination, and acts of hate, 71% of people in vulnerable groups do not report hate-motivated incidents and harassment. And then another stat, more than half of all hate crimes committed between 2004 and 2015 were not reported to law enforcement, according to the U.S. Bureau of Justice Statistics. This is the reality that we live in, that hate crimes, bias incidents, underreporting, there are a variety of factors as to why, right? And that comes down to the individual. If we can work towards trying to be able to make those reporting processes something more accessible, I think is extremely important. I would also add, let's not assume that people are allies. Let's just not assume people are allies, right? I think that, or even we know enough about stuff, we really end up having to go a little bit extra to be able to learn about other communities itself, right? And I know we have lawyers here today, but I think when it comes to education as well, we have to talk about the history. There are tropes and conspiracy theories that really put unnecessarily and wrongfully the Jewish community at the center of it, that are fueling this hate across social media itself. And that sort of stuff is something that we need to be able to teach, for people to know, to be able to identify, because that sort of stuff helps people with the media literacy portion. When they see something on social media or whatever it might be, they can go, wait a minute. And so those are sort of the efforts that we're looking to push out. And so one of the trainings that we provide in the city is Understanding the Jewish Experience, the city's Commission on Human Rights, that really provides the overarching structural dynamics of this system itself, all the way down to what's happening on the ground to what fuels it at top, right? And I think it's important for us to be able to bring those sorts of trainings everywhere and anywhere, right? Whether it's youth, whether it's people in professional jobs itself, to be able to understand how big of a problem this is. It's literally in the DNA of how people think, and we have to be able to retake it out, right? And so I think that's an important aspect of it as well, too. And last but not least, I'm going to plug in again, I think the mayor's idea of breaking bread, building bonds is so important. I'm sorry, it's so important. Individual relationships between people. I sat at dinner not too long ago at Talia Steakhouse. I'm not sure if folks have been there, just up on the Upper West Side. It was myself and it was about 15 other people. There was a rabbi, there was me, a Muslim, there was, the rabbi's daughter, there was a pastor, and we came together. I've never spoken to these people before, but we were asked the question, when was the first time that we stood up for something we believed in? And I was just absolutely amazed to hear from every single person there their personal experiences and realizing that we have similar human experiences in many ways. I think these sorts of conversations are really important. And we're putting out a goal, 1,000 of these dinners across the city. And at the same time, we're going to be going into various places, NYCHA, communities where we're seeing tension, to bring communities together. And we've already received so much commitment from organizations on this that I'm like, wow. But that's also really important for us people to invest in. And that means that's all of you as well, too, to be able to engage in some of those dinners, whether it's a host or be a participant in those spaces as well, to be able to get to know your neighbors. Because there are silos in this city. We got to break them down. We got to show that we're a community of New Yorkers who stand up for each other. When there is anti-Semitism, we should all be there. When there is something that happened that's anti-Black, we should all be there to support each other. And so, thank you.
Thank you so much, Hassan. No problem. A minute or two left. Ari?
I'll try my best to get this quickly. So we've been talking a lot of things, and the words have been said a number of times tonight: hate crimes or bias incidents. Mm-hmm. And just so to be clear, I just wanted to make sure it's clear that a hate crime is a crime that happened and occurred along with now this racial bias or an anti-Semitism bias to it. A bias incident is different than that, where there's no actual crime, but unfortunately there was comments that were said to someone as they're walking down the street, and because they're Jewish, because within that, and any racial comment or anything like that, but no crime is actually occurring. And that actually would be considered a harassment, which you're going to call the police department, and someone's going to call the police department and call them, and they're going to get frustrated with the police department because the police department's going to tell you there's no crime, we can't do anything. And so that often which leads to a lot of times people not reporting it. And that's why there are so many cases of these where it's really a bias incident as opposed to a hate crime. In order for something to become a crime, obviously it needs to fall under one of the statutes of the penal law. Now, again, that shouldn't stop someone from calling the police and reporting it, because that still needs to be written down, stats need to be taken, police officers need to be put there, because we never know when that will then turn into something else. And that's kind of the issue where we have a lot of times where people see things and hear things on the street, they're walking down the street, they've heard someone make a comment, and it's not reported because they get frustrated with what the reaction is from the police department, because the police department is going to tell you there's nothing they can do. But there is something you can do, because by calling it out, by having the NYPD respond, by having maybe if it happens particularly, that we've had this in Brooklyn, there was one incident where it kept happening to kids coming out of a yeshiva, coming out of school, and they kept getting berated as they came out of school. Nobody was threatened, nobody was harmed, no physical violence happened, but it was a constant berating of their children just coming out of school. You Jews, you Jews. That is really just harassment, and constant that happening caused the parents obviously some concern, and they called the police department, and the police department at that point told them, well, there's really nothing we could do. But constantly reporting it had a police officer stand on the corner and have, during the time when the yeshiva was coming out, having the police officer there. The perpetrators did not reappear because they were afraid at that point. And that's important. And that's why reporting is really key. And one other thing within that is also, as attorneys, and you all are all going to go back to your firms, you're going back to your own offices, when we see it from other people, when people say things that it's just run-of-the-mill conversation, they don't think it's really hateful, you have to point it out. And a lot of times, it was said earlier, that we see it in college campuses, and we see it in the young new attorneys that are coming up. They don't understand, and they think this is normal. And we have to point it out. They're not threatening you, they're not committing a crime, but during the course of their sincere conversation, they just don't know. But it's important for us as attorneys and as older attorneys to point it out to them and say, excuse me, this is not the proper way to speak, because that continue that education to make sure that it doesn't happen again.
Thank you so much, Ari. We're going to, each of you were given cards. So I'm going to call up the executive director of the New York City Bar's Office of Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion and Belonging, Tanya Martinez Galanucci, to give some quick remarks, and then we'll go into Q&A where Angie in the back will collect any cards or questions. So we'll get to as many as we can. So if you see Angie in the corner, so while she's the card collector designee, and in the meantime, Tanya, floor is yours.
Thank you so much, Michael. I used to be a teacher too, taught in the Bronx and Washington Heights, and we like to call this.
I got to know where in the Bronx.
I used to teach at Bronx Green Middle School near Pelham, right by the zoo.
All right, it's not my district in case anyone wants to know. But it's so cool.
Well, I just wanted to say this is a tactic I use as a teacher. It's called thinking time.
Okay.
Right. So first of all, yes, I'm Tanya Martinez Galanucci. I am the executive director for the Office of Diversity, Equity, Inclusion, and Belonging. And I feel it's really important to say that. I think it's really important that you know that we put this program on, my office, because just hearing the anecdotes, thank you, much appreciated, because we're hearing the anecdotes about education, about what qualified as being marginalized, what groups were represented, what groups weren't. And I just want you to know, here and always, you belong. It's why belonging was added to our name. This is for everyone. Everyone benefits from belonging. And I just want to harp on, again, just so many, I had notes, I threw them away because everyone said my points, but I just want to harp on some of the really, really great points, starting with Stanley, when he gave us that really powerful message of first they come for you, then they come for you, and then there's no one else to come for because they've come for us all, right? And I'm going to quote one of my faves, Audre Lorde. She said, "There is no thing as a single issue struggle because we do not live single issue lives." And we are already seeing the come for you, come for you, come for you. I don't even have to remind you. We talk about the importance of knowing history for all of our groups. We're seeing history courses across the country being stripped down to nothing. We're talking about folks being targeted for genocide or for extermination. We've heard politicians say trans people need to be exterminated. We're seeing the hate, and it is the same hate. It is the same hate that brings about anti-Semitism. It is the same hate that brings about anti-Blackness. It is the same hate that brings out the anti-LGBTQ plus, hate that we see. And so my reminder to everyone is that we're stronger together. Don't just show up for the events that you personally related. Show up for all of them. Make friends in other communities. We need to move forward together. There's no way we can move forward if not together. And I just want to point out a few ways you can get involved in our office or with the bar. And if you choose not to do it here, that's okay. But please don't leave here and not do something. Find a way to contribute. There is work for everyone in this fight, always. One thing that we're doing is we have a podcast that we are extremely proud of called Building Belonging. And what we're doing there is we are telling the stories of marginalized groups in this industry and beyond, because all stories should be told. And the more we know about others, we learn that we're more similar than different. And so consider this an open invitation to anyone who wants to share their story with us. We would be more than happy to have you. I have to point out that it was Stanley who came to us, a single person, and said, I want this program. Let this be an open invitation that if you want to collaborate and work with my office, please do reach out. We want to work with you. You belong here. Thank you for being here. You're always welcome.
Thank you so much for those powerful words, really. Thank you so much. And I'll just get from Angie.
During this thinking time, I'll tell everyone I just subscribed to the podcast, and there's a ton of content. There's like over 90 episodes, so enjoy.
Yeah, you might.
Building belonging, diversity. New York City Bar.
Yeah.
Yeah. No, you're gonna have 91 is what I said. You must not have heard me right.
So I'm going to hand over the questions. I'm going to read. I think we roughly have time for about 2 questions, so I'm just picking them out at random. So the first question, do you think large, joyous public displays of Jewish pride, such as outdoor menorah lightings or the Israel Day Parade, lessens or heightens anti-Semitic sentiment?
Wait, back to lessons. You know, I love first of all, I'm proud as a Jew. I went for the first time last year up in the crane, the cherry picker, to light the big menorah in Riverdale. That was exciting. And you know, the Israel Day Parade. Small secret about me: I used to be in a Jewish singing group, and we sang in the Israel Day Parade, and it was so much pride. I mean, think about this: with the learning that we so know needs to happen. With the Holocaust is always mentioned, and all the suffering and the hate crimes. It's like a little depressing. But Judaism is about so much more than that. Just think, last Monday night it was like a depressing thing. Actually, someone tried to kill us. His name was Haman. But it's like a joyous holiday. Every Friday night's Shabbat, and you know, the Passover Seder, again, this terrible story, but it's joyous. You're with your families. And I think the more people could see that aspect of the, of the Jewish culture, I think is better, and I think will only serve to lessen anti-Semitism. But again, I think there's value in inviting your non-Jewish friends to the Israel Day Parade, your non-Jewish friends to Shabbat. I know they're doing the breaking bread, building bonds.
Breaking bread, building bonds.
That's what I said.
You can call it B4 if you want to.
That's too much. So when I got that extra funding in the council, part of it was for that inter-community relations, and one of the things that's happening next week is it's a Passover Seder, but it's also an Iftar dinner, but it's also an Easter dinner. And we're getting to share the joy of our respective religions and not just share, oh, this is tragic what happened to me. It's so with the hate crime. There's positive things too. And anytime we can celebrate that, I think will lessen anti-Semitism.
Thank you. All right. And the second question that we have time. Ooh.
I guess just a quick
Okay.
I agree too. And listen, New York City is proud to have those events. And I think that, unwavering support, we should make them bigger and also invite other communities along in that too as well. Thank you.
All right. I can't add. That was perfectly said. By both.
Okay, so and our last question that we have time for is Jewishness recognized as an ethnicity or nationality under the New York City human rights law in addition to it being a religion? So, Ari, I feel like that one's for you.
Can you repeat that one then? What was the beginning?
Is Jewishness recognized as an ethnicity or nationality under the New York City human rights law in addition to it being a religion?
Actually, I think that might be for Hassan. All right. So under the New York penal law, it's not any specific. There's no listing of a religion. So someone who's targeted because of a religion. It's been expanded this year. It's for race, religion, gender expression. There's lots of different categories for why someone can be targeted, and that would elevate a crime to becoming a hate crime. There's not a specific notice of. So any religion would fall under that. I don't know under the hate crime, under the civil rights law.
From my understanding in the human rights law itself, it can go either way. I mean, if someone is being discriminated against because they're Jewish in itself, because of housing discrimination or whatever it might end up being, that in itself is enough. But yeah, that's.
And I think just to distinguish here, and Hassan, correct me if I'm wrong, the Human Rights Commission and the work that happens there is really dealing with the discrimination in a civil capacity as opposed to when Ari deals with it in a criminal capacity. So in any of those cases, like I said, as Hassan said, I don't think it specifically says religion. I think it's for any kind of bias, for any kind of discrimination at the Human Rights Commission handling that in a civil capacity.
Yeah, and what it says religion, identity, it goes into ethnicity, but it doesn't lay it all out in that particular fashion.
I don't know if this was like the intent of the question, but it's always in the back of my mind, which is, Judaism's sort of unique in that way. And I think invariably, what happens is becomes, the question of Israel again. And that's always sort of where it bleeds over, where someone says, no. I wasn't saying that Jewish people kill babies and use their blood to make matzah. I was saying Israelis do that. And that's the blood libel. That's like a real thing. And what I'm hearing now more and more is people just trading the word Jew for Israel. And it makes a legitimate conversation about anti-Semitism and Israel policy very, very challenging. And I would add, as lawyers, this is, again, one of those areas where you have a unique skill set to sort of say, here's how we are defining this ostensibly anti-Israel assault, but it's really, really anti-Semitic. And we're distinguishing this speech as actually, no, this is like legitimate anti-Israel government policy speech. And you being the experts on that really have a lot to add about what those distinctions, and important and difficult, but really, really, prevalent, especially nowadays with politics, really important distinctions to make.
And just to piggyback on that what you said is, that's why also when we've seen, over the last number of years, the IRA definition, the International Holocaust Remembrance Alliance definition of anti-Semitism, even though it's a non-binding definition, when you had so many times entities saying, well, I don't believe what I'm saying is anti-Semitic, and then where is the bar for that? Or on college campuses, what administration's saying, well, we don't view that as anti-Semitism. What's the benchmark? So now we have the IRA definition as a benchmark, which more and more states, more and more cities, more and more municipalities are now passing resolutions to accept as a definition and as a guiding light to determine what is and is not considered anti-Semitism. This way, people can't hide behind words or deeds that they can try to find a loophole in what is or is not considered anti-Semitism. There now is a guide.
But this is also the importance of just talking to people who don't look like you, don't have the same background as you, because we had a really, I think, difficult moment in the council a few months ago. We were talking about a bill called the Fair Chance Housing Act, which means a landlord or a co-op board cannot ask about criminal history or use it in determining whether you can have housing. And one of the gentlemen who was formerly incarcerated, who was Black, said comments that were very, I think, explicitly anti-Asian. Do you remember this? Mm-hmm. And they were very explicit. But then I was asking my colleagues from the Black community about it, and they were saying what he said was wrong. But throughout the hearing, people were using coded language against the Black community. And I think what's really important is to say, like, we in the Black community are, even though it wasn't said explicitly, I don't like Black people, just like we don't usually hear, I don't like Jewish people. We don't always hear that. It looks different to us. It's in talking to my colleagues from the Black community, again, what they were saying is this is the language that is racist, that we perceive as racist, that has been used against us for many years and which harm our community. And I'm grateful to have colleagues who are so open in talking about difficult things like race and ethnicity and religion. We have a council in New York City that is, in many ways, many of us very open to having these difficult conversations. But that is to say, if Jewish people are saying it's anti-Semitic, we take it like this, then let's be sensitive to that. Just like I say, if black people are saying this is language that's harmful to us, I am going to listen to them, and that should go for every community. And that's I think gets to the heart of that question is like, how are we defining Jewish? It's like, just listen to the Jewish community when we tell you this language is harmful and leads to more violent actions.
And I would just add that question in terms of how the Commission on Human Rights carries out its mandate, I think would be best for that agency itself, right? With the organizations that we end up working with, that are the Jewish organizations, whether it's the JCRC or Simon Wiesenthal Center, there are multiple different definitions, but I think the important part of it is what you just said, Councilmember Dinowitz. You have to give a listen to the community. I mean, sometimes things may not necessarily legally look like a hate crime itself. There could be something in the back, like a trope or whatever it might be, that's leading to meet communities where they're at. There's fear for a reason. We're in a context right now where there's so much going on at this moment that folks obviously are concerned. And when they're seeing something that's happening within a larger political context of, look, in this country right now, we have to meet communities where they're at in those situations to make them feel safe.
Well, thank you so much, Hassan, Councilman Ari Farkas. Thank you. Really, a round of applause, please, for this incredible panel. We're just really appreciative to the New York City Bar for taking this issue on, for right away listening to its members and making sure to really put your heart and soul into putting together an incredible event. So really to all of you and to all of the staff of the New York City Bar who really helped and was on calls and was on Zooms and really worked with us over the last months put together. I don't want to start mentioning names because I'm inevitably going to forget somebody, but really to all of you at the New York City Bar who helped and were part of that team, thank you so much for taking this so seriously and being a big part of that. Really, thank you.